My name's Tom, I'm 47, and I live in Billings, Montana. If you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have sworn on my life that Marcy and I were solid. Married for 16 years, 2 kids, a house with a wraparound porch, the American dream type of thing. But looking back now, I realize the cracks were there long before the ground gave way under my feet. Marcy used to be the kind of woman who lit up a room. She had a laugh that turned heads, a way of making people feel like they mattered. But somewhere along the line, that glow turned sharp. Little barbs crept into her voice, sarcasm where there used to be warmth, long nights out with the girls that didn't add up, whispers she cut off when I entered a room. And me? I chalked it up to stress, midlife restlessness, the usual stuff couples wade through. But the signs were there. Missed anniversaries, cold shoulders, the way she'd flinch when I touched her back at night. I tried, Lord knows I tried. Counseling, weekend getaways, love notes on the bathroom mirror. But none of it reached her. I felt like a man standing outside his own life, watching it drift away. And then came the day of the hearing. That morning, I stood in front of the mirror tying my best tie, wondering if this was what defeat smelled like, starched fabric and cheap cologne. What I didn't know was that Marcy had one more card up her sleeve, one last performance to play. And boy, was it a show. We pulled into the courthouse parking lot under a sky so gray it felt like even the sun couldn't be bothered to show up for this disaster. I remember sitting in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Marcy stepped out of her car like she was arriving at a gala, hair perfect, heels clicking confidently across the asphalt, a small smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. But here's the thing I didn't see coming, the curve of her stomach. She was pregnant. I sat there, stunned, watching her smooth her dress over the unmistakable swell of her belly. My first thought wasn't even jealousy or anger. It was confusion, this blinding, suffocating confusion. We hadn't been together in months, hadn't shared a bed in nearly a year. And yet here she was, walking into that courtroom like she was about to play the sympathy card of the decade. Inside, the tension was thick. My attorney, Tomlinson, leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. Just breathe. We've got this." I nodded, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure the whole room could hear it. And Marcy? She was radiant in the worst possible way, laughing softly with her lawyer, resting a protective hand over her stomach like the world's most devoted mother-to-be. She cast me these sideways glances, half pity, half triumph, like she'd already won, like that was just the formality standing between her and a payout. We didn't have to wait long before the judge entered, a tall, weathered man with the kind of face that's seen decades of people trying to outlie each other. When he sat, the room settled into this strange hush, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Marcy's lawyer rose first, spinning a story so thick with honey it nearly made my teeth ache. She painted Marcy as the wronged wife, the brave mother carrying the child of a marriage gone cold. I sat there, fingers laced together so tight they shook, while the words blurred into a background hum. And then came the question, the one that cracked the stage lights and threw the whole production off script. "Mrs. Langston," the judge said, his voice calm but sharp, "who is the father of this child?" Marcy's smile faltered. For the first time that day, she looked small. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, eyes darting toward her lawyer, toward me, toward the floor. The judge waited. The room waited. And in that moment, the realization rippled across the courtroom like a stone tossed into still water. She had no proof. We hadn't been intimate in almost a year. There was no paternity test, no doctor's confirmation tying me to this pregnancy. All she had was the belly and the assumption it would be enough to break the game in her favor. My attorney cleared his throat, a quiet signal that we were ready. I'll never forget the sound the room made right then. Not a gasp, not a murmur, just the shifting of weight, as if everyone present had leaned forward at once. Marcy's face tightened, her jaw clenching ever so slightly. She opened her mouth once, closed it, opened it again, and then came the tears. Big, glistening drops rolled down her cheeks, perfectly timed, like they'd been rehearsed in front of a mirror. Her lawyer patted her arm, whispering something that didn't seem to land. But the judge saw right through it. "Mrs. Langston," he repeated, voice steady, "without a paternity test, the court cannot assume Mr. Langston is the father." It was like the entire room exhaled at once. My lawyer, Tomlinson, straightened his shoulders, his fingers brushing over the manila folder on the table in front of him, the one we'd been preparing for months. In it were medical records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, and photos I never wanted to see but couldn't ignore. Marcy had been careful, but not careful enough. Tomlinson rose. Calm, polite, surgical. He explained to the judge how Marcy had been conducting an affair for nearly 2 years, how the timeline of the pregnancy didn't line up with our last intimate moment. He presented receipts for weekend getaways she'd taken with friends, the suspicious charges on our joint account, The night she claimed to be working late but was, in fact, checked into hotels across town. Marcy's shoulders sank lower with each piece of evidence laid out on the table. And still, no name left her lips. She never named the father, not once. By the time Tomlinson finished, the judge looked exhausted, pinching the bridge of his nose before delivering his verdict. No spousal support. No child support. Fraud charges filed for attempting to mislead the court. I remember the moment Marcy realized it was over, the exact instant the last string in her web of lies snapped. Her face crumpled not with sorrow, but with rage. She shot me a look that was half hatred, half desperation, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. Because right then, in that courtroom in Billings, Montana, I felt something I hadn't known in a long time: freedom. When the judge dismissed us, it was like someone had hit the release valve on a pressure cooker. The courtroom erupted in movement, lawyers shuffling papers, the bailiff calling out instructions, Marcy's mother gasping in the back row like she'd just watched her daughter fall from grace. But through all of it, I just sat there for a moment, frozen in a strange, quiet stillness. I watched as Marcy rose from her chair, swaying slightly, her lawyer frantically whispering in her ear. Her hand shot up to silence him, a flash of the steel I once admired in her when we were younger, back when we were partners instead of opponents. But this wasn't the woman I married anymore. This was someone I didn't recognize, a woman who had built an entire identity on charm and control, now watching it crumble in real time. She turned toward me, and for a split second, I saw the mask slip. Not the rage, not the defiance, but something rawer, something closer to fear. I felt a strange pang in my chest, not love, not pity, just the ghost of the man who had once believed we were in this together. But it was gone as quickly as it came. I gathered my things slowly, feeling the weight of the years settle on my shoulders, the endless arguments, the sleepless nights, the hollow apologies, and now, finally, the ending. My lawyer clapped me on the back with a quiet, "Well done," and went to finalize the paperwork. I stood there, briefcase in hand, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I realized I was free to walk out. Outside the courthouse, the air was cold and biting, but it felt good. I took a long breath, watching it fog in front of me, and for a moment, I just stood there. Then I saw her. Marcy was standing under a bare oak tree in the parking lot, her phone pressed to her ear, face pale and drawn tight. I didn't need to hear the words to know she was trying to salvage whatever scraps she had left, calling the father, maybe, or some friend she burned one too many times. Her shoulders trembled, but her voice stayed sharp, slicing through the air like a whip. That was Marcy, all right. Even when the ship was sinking, she was shouting orders on deck. I turned and walked away, each step lighter than the last. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. No longer our apartment, just mine now. The quiet was almost oppressive, the kind of silence you don't notice when you're married because life fills in the gaps, the hum of the dishwasher, her footsteps upstairs, the occasional laugh from the other room. But when you're alone, really alone, the silence hums in your ears like static. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sank into the old leather armchair I dragged here after moving out, the only piece of furniture that still felt like mine. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and for a second, I thought about ignoring it. God knows I deserved one night without anyone clawing at me for something. But habit is a funny thing. I glanced at the screen, an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. The voice on the other end was male. Smooth. Too smooth. The kind of voice that sounded like it practiced charm in the mirror. Tom? It's Kyle. We, haven't met. But I think you know who I am. My stomach sank. I didn't know a Kyle, but the name landed like a punch. Marcy's mystery man had a name now. He fumbled through some pleasantries, like we were two buddies in a bad sitcom. Said he felt real bad about everything that went down. Said Marcy was going through a lot, and maybe I could ease up a little on her, because nobody meant for this to get so messy. I stared at the ceiling, phone pressed to my ear, bourbon burning its way down my throat. And then he dropped the real reason for the call. She's saying she doesn't have anywhere to go. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a guilt call. It was a request. No, a setup. He wanted me to offer her the couch, a place to stay, maybe a lifeline she could swing back to when his life got too complicated. For a second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly Marcy. I let the silence stretch on the line, let Kyle stew in his own discomfort. You'd be surprised how quickly someone like that fills a silence, like they're allergic to it. He started rambling. Something about how Marcy was just overwhelmed, how this baby wasn't planned, and how everyone deserves a second chance. I set my glass down carefully, fingers drumming on the arm of the chair. There was a time, not that long ago, when those words might have worked on me. When I still believed Marcy's messes were something I could help clean up. When I thought love meant rescuing someone over and over, even when they were the one who set the fire. But that time was over. I cleared my throat, cutting him off mid-sentence. Kyle, I said calmly, if Marcy's told you half the story, she's already lied to you. And if you think I'm the guy who's going to bail her out after what she's done, you're both dumber than I thought. Dead silence. Then, a short, sharp breath on the other end. A muttered, yeah, okay, man, and the line went dead. I sat there for a long time afterward, not out of anger, not out of triumph, but out of sheer exhaustion. Because that call, that moment, was when I realized just how deeply Marcy had counted on my weakness. And how, for the first time, I hadn't given it to her. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Marcy herself. One text. Please. Just one night. I stared at the screen until it dimmed and went black. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but no reply came. And that silence, that empty space, it said more than any words I could have sent. I went to bed that night knowing something had shifted inside me. Not just freedom, not just anger, but a sense of finality. There would be no more rescues. Not from me. Not ever again. The next morning was one of those rare Montana mornings when the cold seems to sneak right through the walls. I stood at the kitchen window with a mug of coffee in my hands, watching my breath fog the glass, and for the first time in years, I felt, still. Not happy, not exactly, but still. Like the spinning had finally stopped. And then the doorbell rang. I can't say I was surprised. Somewhere deep down, I think I'd known Marcy would show up. She was never the type to accept no for an answer when she was desperate. And now, with no judge, no lawyer, no boyfriend to smooth things over, she was on my doorstep. I opened the door and there she was, bundled in that green coat I bought her on our 10th anniversary, a suitcase at her feet, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, face pale without makeup. For a heartbeat, I saw the girl I once knew, the woman I'd built a life with. But then her eyes flicked up to mine, and I saw it, that flash of calculation. She started to speak, some carefully prepared line, but I lifted a hand and stopped her. Don't. I said softly. Marcy's mouth snapped shut, her jaw working as if she was chewing over the words she'd been so sure would win me over. I stepped aside, not to let her in, but to pick up the suitcase. I set it just inside the entryway, handed it back to her, and stepped back. The message couldn't have been clearer. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time, they weren't the glossy, camera-ready kind she'd used in court. These were raw, jagged, real. And for a split second, I felt the echo of the old ache, that familiar tug of wanting to fix, to comfort, to carry us both through the wreckage. But I didn't move. Take care of yourself, Marcy, I said, voice low but steady. You're going to have to figure this one out on your own. For a long, suspended moment, we just stared at each other, two people who had once shared everything now standing on opposite sides of a threshold neither of us could cross anymore. Then she nodded, a sharp, broken little motion, turned, and walked away down the snowy sidewalk. I watched her go, the green of her coat a shrinking dot against the pale white of the morning. And when I closed the door, it wasn't anger that filled me. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. The days that followed were nothing like I'd imagined. No grand awakening, no movie-worthy fresh start. Just the sound of the heater kicking on in the middle of the night and the quiet creak of floorboards as I walked from room to room, tracing the outline of a life that was no longer shared. I thought I'd feel anger, maybe even a touch of satisfaction after everything, after the courtroom, after Marcy walking away with her suitcase. But what settled in was something stranger, something heavier, quiet. I didn't turn on the TV to drown it out. I didn't call friends to fill the space. Instead, I let the quiet wrap around me, and in that space, I started noticing things I hadn't let myself notice before. Like how tired I'd been. Not the kind of tired a good night's sleep fixes, but the deep-down kind that creeps into your bones. How long it had been since I laughed without bracing for the fallout. How many times I looked across the dinner table and felt like a stranger in my own home. It hit me one night as I sat out on the balcony, wrapped in an old blanket, a cold beer in my hand. For years, I'd been mourning a version of Marcy that had stopped existing long before the first lie, long before the affair, maybe even before the marriage had started to crack. I wasn't grieving the woman who left me. I was grieving the memory of a girl I fell in love with, the one who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen and steal my French fries when she thought I wasn't looking. And somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, I had traded myself away trying to hold on to someone who was already gone. And here's the part that caught me off guard. It wasn't just Marcy who had lied. I'd lied to myself too. I told myself we were fine, that I could fix it, that love meant hanging on, no matter how heavy it got. But out there under the wide Montana sky, staring up at a sweep of stars, I felt the first crack of something new breaking through all that heaviness. Not joy, not hope, just the simple, unfamiliar thought. Maybe I was allowed to let go. A week after Marcy left my doorstep, life began to shape itself into a strange, raw rhythm. Mornings were mine again. No navigating her moods, no tiptoeing through a kitchen thick with tension. Just the steady hiss of the coffee pot, the soft creak of the front porch as I sat and watched the sky shift from gray to gold over the rooftops of Billings. I was starting to breathe again. But life has this wicked sense of humor, doesn't it? Just when you think you're settling into something like peace, it throws you a curveball. It came in the form of a letter. Not a text, not an email, but an honest-to-God letter, hand-delivered and slipped under my door. The handwriting on the envelope stopped me cold. Delicate, looping script I hadn't seen in years. It was from Gwen. Now, you wouldn't know the name, but Gwen had been a part of my life long before Marcy. We'd grown up 3 blocks apart, the kind of friends who made daisy chains in 2nd grade and sneaked beers on summer nights in high school. We drifted apart after college, each pulled into our own lives, and when I married Marcy, well, that door quietly shut. I sat there, envelope in hand, heart ticking in my chest like a second hand on a clock. And for a long moment, I didn't open it. But curiosity and something deeper, something aching finally won. Inside was a short note. She'd heard about the divorce. She wanted me to know she was sorry, that she remembered the man I was before all this, and that if I ever wanted to grab coffee, she was around. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't some grand, sweeping declaration. It was just human, and it cracked something open in me. Because up until that point, I'd been so focused on what I was losing, I hadn't thought once about what I might gain. Not romance, necessarily. Not even friendship. But connection. The simple possibility that life after Marcy didn't have to be just survival. That maybe, just maybe, there was something waiting beyond the quiet. That night, I sat on the porch under the Montana stars, letter in hand, and for the first time, I let myself feel something other than loss. I let myself feel the flicker of what could come next. The morning after Gwen's letter, I woke before the sun, something stirring in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, not exactly, but motion, a quiet pull toward life again. I stood at the window, coffee warming my hands, watching as the light slid over the snow-dusted roofs of Billings, and for the first time in years, the day ahead didn't feel like something to survive. It felt open. I didn't call Gwen that day. Didn't rush to fill the space her letter had left. Instead, I let the idea of it sit beside me, the idea that life might still hold new chapters, that the door Marcy slammed shut wasn't the only one I'd ever get to walk through. I spent that weekend doing things I hadn't done in years. I drove out toward the Beartooth Mountains, not to hike, not to conquer, just to sit by the roadside and watch the sun cut through the peaks. I dug my old guitar out of the closet, ran my fingers over the strings, surprised at how quickly the calluses came back on my fingertips. I even cleaned out the spare bedroom, the one Marcy had filled with boxes of clothes, shoes, and half-finished projects. By Sunday afternoon, it was empty, light pouring in through the windows, the hardwood floors bare and gleaming. And standing there, in that room that used to hold so much of someone else, I realized I was finally making space for myself. Here's what they don't tell you about heartbreak. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet that gets you. The way a single coffee cup in the sink can feel like a wound. The way the bed feels too big. The way you catch yourself reaching for someone who isn't coming home. But here's the part one didn't expect. The quiet can also heal you. It teaches you to sit with yourself, to sift through the wreckage, and pull out the pieces worth keeping. It teaches you to hear your own voice again. And if you're lucky, it teaches you that the end of one story doesn't mean the end of you. That Sunday night, as the sun sank behind the mountains and the sky blushed with soft pink and gold, I sat on my porch, phone resting beside me, letter folded neatly in my pocket. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a man abandoned or broken or lost. I just felt like a man, standing at the edge of something new, finally ready to take the first step forward.